Just a little background story on this. About 4 or 5 years ago, Gavin Manson and I were doing this presentation, sort of a tag team approach. Earlier, Don Forbes and I would do it. In fact, Don, Gavin, and I worked together on this project. That's Don's photo there, right after Hurricane Juan. But on this one occasion, Gavin and I were asked to prepare the presentation and then name it, in sort of a scientific, alphabetical way. So John Charles and Gavin Manson, last name protocol in alphabetical order, it became the Charles Manson Show. And I can remember looking up on the screen and just going, oh no, okay. So anyway. I'll give you a little bit of background on this. This is, what's that?
Me hitting the wrong button. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'll just run through this, give you the background on the project, the plan, how we got to grab the airborne LiDAR. We remember we were working on AR4 at that time when we were doing this project, which actually started in 2007. I'll give you an update on where we are now and our coastal climate issues in HRM and some of the projections that we came up with. Some of the sea level rise scenarios that we arrived at, and vulnerability analysis. So the vulnerability analysis, wave run-up, current work, next steps, project team, and then there'll be a couple of additional things that I just want to focus on. As a land use planner, I'm certainly not a scientist, and over the years, I've learned to depend on the scientific community. Certainly this project would have gone absolutely nowhere without the support of Don Forbes and Chris Hopkinson. When we started doing the initial work on this project back in 2006, we had to write an RFP for the LiDAR. We had no technical expertise whatsoever. We didn't know how to scope the project. We knew what we wanted. We wanted to analyze coastal risk for populations that, as a municipality, we were responsible for, but we just didn't know how to get there. So that's where all these great people came in: Natural Resources Canada, Nova Scotia Department of Energy, the Halifax Port Authority. Province kicked in money. Port Authority kicked in money, HRM kicked in. The whole project cost was a grand total of $150,000. We were certainly on a budget, but we managed to deliver. The other side of the story, of course, is the processing. It's the work. It's the follow-up. It's making sure that you've got quality control, and that certainly would have equaled that. And I've thrown in consulting services too, because this is the follow-up. This is where the rubber starts to hit the road, where you get from sort of vision into policy and then into implementation. And that's a key in planning, because you can have all the policies in the world, but if you don't actually deliver on them and implement them, they're worthless. So here's our project plan. Luckily, the green areas, the green check marks, shows that we've delivered. We've done all that, and I'll go through that. The purple, we're there. We haven't fully delivered on that, and I'll explain that as well. For us, this is the background of climate change and adaptation, and I think you've seen all that before. You've seen this as well, but certainly that image of the first bare earth model that we got was just stunning to everyone in the city. That's Point Pleasant Park, and we were just completely breathless when we started to see the products coming out. Going back to the whole idea, how do you scope a project like this with a limited budget? So you can see this area here, this area over here, 2 flight areas. It came in just under 2,000 square kilometers. All of HRM is approaching 6,000. It's 5,700 and change. So why did we do this area? Well, we sort of changed our thinking and said, what are all the watersheds that flow into the harbor? Why don't we capture from that point? So we captured from a watershed basis rather than using administrative boundaries, which are totally artificial. So we let the land teach us that lesson. We also had input out here. We didn't have enough money to do the Eastern Shore. We just didn't have enough, but we wanted to grab a little bit over here because that's a highly erodible end of our municipality. Thought it would be great to grab Martinique Beach and just look at some of the dynamics that were going on there. And then again, from a municipal perspective, it was the follow-up, it was the QC, and that was the lesson that, Don and Chris kept harping on, is unless you do the QC, it's just a bunch of pretty pictures. And when it comes to people challenging the quality of your work, you have to do all of this to make sure that it works out. And it did. So you can see the mean difference and showed up very well. But that was just the start. Another pretty picture of Point Pleasant, the rail cut downtown. So we've seen this, AR4 findings. Guess what? The AR5, things haven't changed. This information, the hockey stick, the instrumental history, and then the projections, and looking at the scenario selection. So we had those B1 up to A1 FI scenario to select from. And this was what we had when we started to look at what scenarios we would apply. And sort of B1 is where we've all held hands and changed our ways and changed the world and done everything right. A1 FI is no noticeable change. So that was an easy one to select as a scenario at that time. Also note that sea level rise was not based on any ice flow. So luckily at that point, while we were doing our research, Ramsdorf came out and started to look at the observed versus the projected, so we incorporated that. We also started looking at the measurement of relative sea level rise, which sort of complicates things in Nova Scotia. But we had a great start at that instrumental record with the pillar at Bedford Institute. And this was sort of the gold standard, in terms of what we had in that historic record from the harbor, and that gave us a great starting point. So this is where we came to. We understood that it was likely an underestimate, but it was a starting point. And getting back to what motivated the city to do all of this work, it was obviously the great wake-up call of Hurricane Juan. That photo again was taken by Don, and that's just outside of my office, and you can see all of the rail cars. Luckily, none of them were filled with hazardous products, and they were able to right them. But it was a bullet that we dodged. The surge didn't coincide with high tide. I always like the top left image. I always imagine being at the wheel of that ship and looking out and going, let's turn this thing around real fast or slam it into reverse, but nothing you can do. So we looked at scenarios, and you got to think at this point we could pick any scenario you want. But scenario one is no climate change. And remember, we're a municipal government, and we're going out there saying, everyone stay calm. We've got time to plan. It's not too late. Imagine that there's no such thing as climate change. And guess what? Even with no climate change, we're still seeing our sea level rise. So we've done a great job over the last century in dealing with sea level rise. We can continue to do that. It's going to perhaps accelerate a bit faster, but as long as we're prepared, we can do something about it. and that's where we started to look at scenario 2. You start thinking of, of Goldilocks, not too warm, not too hot, and just right. But then we also had to look at some extreme examples as well, just to see how we were doing. We looked finally at scenario 2 and 3 as our options, and we went back to council. And again, we weren't saying, we know what the future is going to look like and this is it. We just said, these are only scenarios. These are the things that might happen in the future, and it's an opportunity for us to use this as a starting point when we go to the public for consultation. We started experimenting with some of the depth scenarios, and again, it was an interesting exercise. Of course, when you're going to the public with something like that, they think that advancing blue is permanent. It's just surge, but it means that it is going to recede. And so we had to work a lot on messaging on the way through. In fact, some of the slides that we use for the general public have a big red box at the bottom saying storm surge only, just to let people know that this is not going to be permanent. But we started to look at this and use for land use planning. One of our partners was Waterfront Development Corporation for Nova Scotia. Waterfront Development Corporation owns downtown Halifax, all the waterfront basically. And it's a crown corporation. So they lease their land out, they don't sell it. And so they started to use this right away. And this was the next iteration, which was actually giving people the depth scenarios. So now you start seeing the connection between land use planning and engineering, because they started to have that base of knowledge.